stop the rot. Don't stop the rot. Deadwood invertebrates and their conservation. So there we go. Right, a bit about me. So I'm a Warwickshire-based freelance ecologist. I specialise in invertebrates, conservation, especially pollinators, and also trees. I'm not an arboriculturalist, but I do love trees in terms of veteran trees, the ecology of veteran trees, that sort of thing. I've been an amateur entomologist since childhood. I grew up in North London and actually had despite the fact it was the edge of London, had a wonderfully outdoor existence that you rarely see today. I'm very lucky. I've surveyed hundreds of sites all over the UK. I was a local government ecologist for Coventry, 1990 to 1991. And I've also worked for the old Nature Conservancy Council, which was so good that they broke it up. Too powerful for its own good, so they broke it up. And I've worked for 2 museum services, a wildlife trust and bug life. And I've written quite a lot of stuff, some books, lots of reports, guidance sheets, that sort of stuff. So some examples there. And yeah. So, oh, I can't see the top of my screen for some reason. Oh, I can't. Right. So what am I trying to say here? Yeah, I think what I'm trying to say here, because I've lost the top of my screen, is that I'm talking about 2 of my favourite subjects, which is old deadwood habitats and insects. And I suppose this is quite well timed, really, because about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, I produced a big woodland trust report on the pollinators and associated with deadwood and old trees. And you can get that online from my ResearchGate site. But it's a fascinating insight into all of the pollinators that come out of deadwood and old trees, and some very beautiful things, as you can see. So that's a report you can get online if you want to know more about pollinating things that come out of old trees and deadwood. And that also became a British Wildlife article a couple of years ago, a sort of summary of it. So yeah. Anyway, so some complimentary things to say about a veteran tree. Or an old bloke like me. So yeah, there you go. Rotten to its core. Well, dodgy, falling apart. Yeah, all these things cracking up. Yeah, on its way out. Yeah. Can you all hear me, by the way?
Yep.
Oh, fantastic! Because yeah, all I can see is Mike Crichton has turned into a leopard or puma or something. I'm glad you're still there. Yeah, so these are some of the complimentary things you can say about an old tree, and it's interesting because one person's take on an old tree is different to another's. As an ecologist, I get so excited by something like this. But when I worked for the Nature Conservancy Council, we had a Forestry Commission leaflet called "Signs of Hazardous Trees." And really, it was there. Everything they felt justified felling of a tree was everything I thought was exciting about a tree. And I wasn't the only one. I was part of a big team of people that got very excited about old trees. And it came to an interesting head in the late 1980s, where Prince Philip wanted to get rid of some of the big old oaks at Windsor. And of course, Nature Conservancy Council, which is also part of Crown, it was civil service, wanted to preserve the trees. And that's the time when Ted Green came to the fore. And I think, and also, yeah, that's when the ancient tree forum started to form on the basis of that conflict between what the Crown Estates wanted, with Philip at the helm, and what the Nature Conservancy Council wanted. And in fact, that tree there is a beautiful tree within Windsor Great Park. But yeah. So deadwood, it's a much bigger subject than most people realise. It comes in many varieties and it's created by many processes. We currently have, and this will interest Paul, Paul Brock, 32,000 species of insect on the UK list. Now, I only found that out the other day because I've been saying there's 24,000. But a new JNCC report's just come out and it says 32,000, which is a big leap, but I'll run with it because it sounds impressive. What I can say is that's more species of wildlife than all the other wildlife groups put together. If you were to add up all the other invertebrates, all the plants, all the fungi, it doesn't come to 32,000. So that's a lot of biodiversity. And we know that there's at least 2,000 species of insects strongly associated or dependent on deadwood or tree wounds or the fungi that come off deadwood. And we call these saproxylic species. And this includes about 750 sorts of fly, 700 sorts of beetle, also assorted moths, bugs, bees, wasps, ants, and also things like some of the spiders. And we keep discovering new ones. And we know that at least 320 of those species are regular flower visitors, what we call pollinators. So you can see that from that report I did. And we have to thank Keith Alexander for a lot of these statistics, because I'm not really the top expert in this subject. Keith Alexander is. Okay, so what is a saproxylic insect or invertebrate? It's one that develops in association with dead wood or an associated resource. That might be a standing or fallen tree, a dead tree, a tree stump, a log pile, a detached limb, any dead wood attached to a living tree. It could be heart rot, it could be dead branches, dead underground roots, or the wounds of living trees such as saprons and rot holes. And saproxylic insect also includes the species associated with the fungi that come off that dead wood or an old living tree. And it's not very sharply defined because some species are facultatively saproxylic. You think of a lot of the insects that use bee hotels in nature, they would use perhaps a beetle hole in a dead tree, but if you give them a bee hotel, they'll use that. And some things we suspect are saproxylic, but it's not necessarily proven. But what we do know, thanks to Keith Alexander, is we've got at least 2,000 species of saproxylic insect in the UK. And many of them are very rare, very restricted, and some are stunning, really spectacular creatures. Okay, I can't see the top of my slide. Yes, I think I know what I'm saying here. Did you know that Britain has a higher number of veteran old trees than the rest of Western Europe combined? And we have some very, very special sites that feature a continuity of high quality deadwood rich environments stretching back for centuries, if not millennia, possibly even in some cases back to the wildwood. Notably our wood pasture remnants, of which you have quite a lot in the New Forest, and some of our ancient woods. I mean, some ancient woods are only a few hundred years old, but some ancient woods are thousands of years old. And also we have these very, very old hedged landscapes in Britain, and some of those hedges could be medieval, possibly even post-Roman in origin, and some of the trees can be very, very old. So, and also just a very long continuity of deadwood habitat. There's a bit of Staverton Park with my brother David. That's an amazing concentration of old trees, Staverton Park in Suffolk. Okay. And here are some examples of truly ancient trees, some of which probably predate the Norman invasion. Oh, look at that, the Queen Elizabeth I sessile oak. If I tell you I'm 5'6", you can see how big that sessile oak is at Cowdray Park, the one on the left. Isn't that incredible? And the sign, the interpretation sign boasts it's 1,000 years old. Now, give me a break, because that tree on the right, which is Windsor Great Park, that's about 1,000 years old, and you can see the sessile oak of Cowdray Park is far, far older than that old oak on the right. So I reckon it's at least 1,500 years old, and we've got yew trees that are supposed to be 2,000 years old. But you know, there are very few places in Europe where you can see trees of that age. Phenomenal individual trees, phenomenal. Okay, I wish I could see the top of my slide. What am I trying to say here? I think I'm talking about the New Forest here, and the fact that so within your place, your area, places like Dennywood and Markash are particularly good for seeing high concentrations of old trees. I've got a lovely picture there, the Knightwood oak. I think the Knightwood oak is that the biggest oak in the New Forest? I think it might be. It's not massive by national standards. It's pretty impressive. I think it's about 8 meters, but oaks go up to about 13 meters in girth in Britain. And we've got a very old beech there at Markash with my friend Russell, my oldest friend Russell. We grew up in North London together, and Russell's now a legend within the arboriculture world. So I took him to the New Forest to see some really good old beech trees. Look at that beech tree, isn't it phenomenal? That's one of the biggest ones in the New Forest. Fantastic. Okay. So, can you see what the top of my slide says?
Yep.
What's the title say?
Dead Yet Alive.
Yes, good. I might have to tell you to tell me the titles of each slide because I can't see them. So there are many forms of deadwood associated with living trees. And in fact, trees can start to produce wounds and small sources of deadwood from a young age, particularly if they get strimmer damage or a bit of vandalism to a branch can almost immediately start to get a wound going, even in quite a young tree. But the variety and importance of deadwood on a living tree tends to become greater the older a tree gets, because it just accumulates. You know, it's like a human being accumulating blemishes. You know, trees accumulate wounds. Yeah, and that's because old trees tend to have more wounds, more damage. They tend to have more large cavities, more large limbs, and heart rot. And that is a natural process of aging. It doesn't necessarily mean they're dying; they're just aging. And I suppose the other great thing about old trees is that they provide a historic link with older landscapes. So if you've got an oak that's 600 years old, well, halfway through that lifestyle, 300 years ago, it probably already had lots of wounds. So it's a historic link to a much older medieval, Anglo-Saxon, possibly even pre-Roman landscape. The way I like to describe it is think of a relay race. Think of a really good relay race where there's lots of runners and they're passing lots of battens, and all those battens are getting to the finish line. That's what I call a good relay race. And if you pretend that's trees, think of a big collection of old trees passing their precious cargo of unusual invertebrates, unusual fungi through the centuries. And that's the way I like to think of it. And you can have a good baton swapping race and a bad one. And often today, what you see doesn't always give you a good clue as to how good the race has been. But the insects will often tell you how good the relay race has been. But basically, the more trees you've got, the more age classes you've got within a site, the more passing of rare insects from one microhabitat on a tree to another microhabitat on a tree nearby, the better. So it's like a big baton race, and it's about transferring saprozytic invertebrates through time. And the very best sites like the New Forest and Windsor Forest, you've got hundreds of years of baton, of relay racing and baton transfer. I think that's the best way I can describe what we're thinking of here. The passing of rare invertebrates through the centuries and millennia. Okay, some definitions. So a mature tree, and the definition varies a little bit, is usually one that's got a healthy full-size crown. That doesn't mean to say it's ancient or even a veteran. A veteran is perhaps, for an oak, it might be after 250 years old. It starts to lose limbs, it gets rot holes, it gets heart rot. So for an oak, I would say it starts to become a veteran perhaps when it's 250 years old. Probably the same for beech. Maybe 200 years for beech, because they seem to get rot holes earlier on. If you're a birch, maybe 150 years, maybe 100 years if you're an apple. So it varies according to the tree species, but it's when they start to become quite interesting in terms of the microhabitats they support. I suppose the other thing, a veteran tree, it has to be quite rare. It has to be unusually old within the landscape. But ancient is for the very oldest examples of a tree species, the ones that perhaps hundreds of years old, really exceptionally rare within their type of tree. Major losses of limbs, highly reduced crowns, well-established fungi and decay. And I've got some good examples there. So I've got what I would call a mature tree on the left, but it's not that exciting to an entomologist. Then you've got a veteran tree in the middle. That's an oak, probably about 5 meters girth, and it will have quite a lot of wounds. And you can see that the crown is already starting to reduce. It's becoming quite irregular in shape. And then you've got a really, really old oak at Croft Castle in Herefordshire, and you can see that it's a mighty old oak. And it's got a really, very untidy, but in a way beautiful. It's got a lot of character to it. And and they do say an oak spends 300 years growing, 300 years resting, 300 years declining gracefully. And it's worth saying that coppicing and pollarding can greatly extend the life of a tree. In fact, many of our oldest oaks and beeches are old pollards. Okay, so there you go. This is a picture, an illustration from a Helen Reid book, an old English nature manual on old trees. And it's a great diagram. It just shows all the sorts of main deadwood and decay features. You can see, to an entomologist, an old tree is a very complicated series of microhabitats. And this is why I like entomology, because it doesn't matter what habitat I'm in. As an entomologist, you just look at these habitats in a lot more detail, a lot more critically. I get excited about bare ground. A botanist doesn't usually get so excited about bare ground as I do. I get very excited by things like microclimates. Is it a warm hot spot? Is there more insect activity because it's warm and sheltered? So as an entomologist, you see the world in a slightly different way. As I say, ecologists get excited by this, but some arboriculturists only see the hazards. And I've seen too many trees locally that have been chopped down long before they should have done, because people saw them as a hazard. Okay, what's the title on that one?
Important features of a living tree for insects.
There, great stuff, thanks. So yep, so we've got some examples. Dead attached limbs, you know, your staghorn trees, trees with heart rot and internal wood mold, particularly in pollards. And that wood mold can vary depending on what fungus is causing it. You can get red heart rot, you can get white heart rot, and different insects will use the different sorts of heart rot. You can get decaying underground roots. I suspect they're quite important for some of the hoverflies associated with old trees, because the underground roots can get quite wet and sort of porridge-like. You can get dry cavities of assorted sizes, but you can also get water-filled rot holes, and you can see that beech in the middle there. Beeches are particularly good at getting water-filled rot holes, and those can be really good for some unusual hoverflies, which I'll talk about in a short while. Sap runs, so that you can see that third from the left, that trunk with a shiny trunk. Can you see the shiny trunk? That's now Paul Brock will know that, because Paul Brock introduced me to that tree. That was in Fursley Gardens. That was an old apple tree in Fursley Gardens, and it had one of those fermenting, hissing sap runs that you could smell from quite a distance away. And on certain days, it was actually making a noise. And oh boy, the insects around that sap run were fantastic. Sap runs are a really exciting habitat. Really exciting. A lot of specialist flies and beetles. Of course, they also attract things like red admirals and hornets and various other things. Wonderful habitats. And then you get all the fungi, the different fungi on trunks and tree trunks. And also you can get, what else? You can get old bird nests, woodpecker holes, squirrel drays, bat roosts. And these all support insects of different sorts, sometimes specialists. Very exciting, very diverse, varied features on old trees. What's the heading on that one, Mike?
Other types of dead wood important.
Yes, sorry, I'll probably have to do this quite a bit because I just can't see the top of my slides. So yeah, other dead standing trees and tree stumps, dead fallen branches, exposed root plates, which can be really good for nesting bees and wasps. Fallen branches, the old roots beneath the ground, which, as I said, you know, there can be an awful lot of decay below the ground. And sometimes you see a hoverfly ovipositing at the base of the tree. The larvae are actually going to end up below the ground level. They're going to move into the wettest bits of dead wood. The fungi that grow on dead wood, partially submerged dead wood. And I'll come on to that because that's a specialist habitat that has some very special insects. And the decomposition process is not unlike that of carrion. You almost get a form of forensic entomology for wood with clear phases, key insect species, and they can be strongly influenced by location. So deadwood that's in a damp, shady place will support different insects to deadwood that's in a sunlit, dry location. And also your geographic location can make a big difference. You know, you're going to get different things in Scotland to what you get in the New Forest. So yeah. Okay. What's the heading on that, Mike?
No title.
Fantastic. So all these niches support a variety of saprophytic species. Some of those are generalists, things like the Batman hoverfly, Myothropa florea, is a generalist you can see quite widely, often some distance away from where it's breeding. Others are much more specialized and restricted, and some, for reasons we don't understand, can be much rarer than suitable habitat. So, for example, the internationally rare violet click beetle, when you know where it's breeding, it's hard to understand why it is so rare, but it's only known from about 4 sites. The Royal Splinter Cranefly, which I photographed there, is only known, I believe, from 2 sites in the world, one in Slovenia and then Windsor Great Park, or Windsor High Standing Wood. It's really rare, and I don't know quite why it's rare, although it is worth saying, this is a funny story, when you start to use things like pheromones, suddenly you realise they're not quite as rare as you thought. My friend Steve Lane, who's a coleopterist based in Norfolk, he once went to a pub and his shirt had pheromone from rusty click beetle. And when he went to the pub near Norwich, suddenly rusty click beetles came out of nowhere and started landing on him, far from anywhere where they'd been recorded. So sometimes if you use pheromones, you suddenly realise things aren't necessarily as rare as you think they are. So that's very interesting. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to review some of the main insect groups associated with dead wood. I have to say my passions are for flies and for bees and wasps. I'm not the world's greatest coleopterist, although normally coleoptera get the tend to dominate these talks. So probably it's just leveling the balancing things out. But there's going to be a particular emphasis on flies here. So let's start with the hoverflies. So I got into hoverflies when I was about 12 years old. I remember being in North London. I thought, oh, I really love hoverflies. I'm going to make a little collection of hoverflies. And during my summer holiday, which is what, 6 weeks, I would go into my local green space in North London. Every day I came back with a new type of hoverfly, or it felt like it. I was completely hooked. It was far more exciting than butterflies. So I stopped collecting butterflies and I started collecting hoverflies and just studying them. But I'm just going to do a lovely celebration of hoverflies here. I'll point out the ones, well, all of those occur in the New Forest. All of those are New Forest. All of those can be found in New Forest. But these four are examples of hoverflies that breed in these water-filled rock holes, particularly of beech. But, you know, often it's not the species of tree that matters. It's just which tree. Beech is just particularly good at producing water-filled rock holes. But I don't think anything's restricted to beech. But we got the one at the top left-hand corner. That's called Pecota personata, and that is the best bumblebee mimic in the British insect fauna. Really, you see them buzzing around these trees. You think, why is a bumblebee buzzing around that beech tree? Then it lands, and then suddenly you know, oh, it's a Pecota. So it's a mind-blowing hoverfly, really fantastic mimic. Then we got the Batman hoverfly, and that was not a particularly good example. But if you get a good one, it's got the Batman logo on the back of the thorax. What's interesting about that one is that we think there are two species involved. We're just waiting for the paper to be published. We've been given the indication that it's going to be split into two species, and both of them are in Britain. So that's quite exciting. And then we got that green one at the bottom is Calycera aurata, one of our green metallic hoverflies with white tips to the antennae. Isn't that beautiful? And in fact, this autumn I did really well because I managed to get some photos of something that looks very similar to it called the ivy hoverfly, Calycera spinola, which looks almost identical, but it's got black bands across the abdomen. At the moment, that's very much a thing of Eastern England, but it is spreading, and maybe one day it will turn up in the New Forest. So those are four examples of hoverflies that breed in water-filled rock holes. Then we've got some examples of hoverflies that breed in sap runs and sappy wounds. And in fact, yeah, Paul Brock may recognise that because that's an oak tree in Denny Wood. You can see the dark saffron on it, and we've got a Brachiopa. There's 4 species of Brachiopa in Britain. Most of them are associated with saffrons. That Brachiopa on the top left-hand corner. Then we've got Ferdinandia cuprea on the top right, and then we got Volucella inflator. No, not inflator on that great big thing on the bottom bottom left-hand corner. That seems to be associated with Cossus, was it goat moth burrows. And then we've got a really strange hoverfly called Silota anthracina, which doesn't even look like a hoverfly, but as far as we know, that's associated with saffrons. And that some of those were photographed in Denny Wood. I think 2 of those were photographed in Denny Wood. So Denny Wood is one of the best places to see those. So that's things in saffrons and sappy wounds. Then we've got a series of hoverflies associated with the damp, hot rot and the decaying roots at the bottom of a trunk. So you can imagine that sort of very damp wood mold that forms at the bottom of a very old trunk and in the decaying roots. And we got Cryorhina flacosa at the top, then the really big Cryorhina ranunculi, top right. Cryorhina ranunculi is fantastic because it's a really aggressive root. It will actually attack bumblebees and other insects that are around the blossoms. So it's really spectacular, and it's not that rare. If you go, the best place to find it in the New Forest, if you go to places with cherry laurel, it likes, as well as pussy willow and blackthorn. You've got some really good sites in the New Forest where we get a little bit of cherry laurel, and it loves cherry laurel blossom. And in fact, I think that photograph was photographed near Rhinefield. It was the what's the big plantation near Rhinefield? Blackwater Plantation, Arboretum, and the car park for that has got some cherry laurel, and that's where I photographed that one. Now you'll recognise the one at the bottom left-hand corner because that's Caliprobola speciosa, the green forest hoverfly, and this is the one that some of us were talking about just before we started the talk. But you know, this is a very restricted hoverfly, bright green, gorgeous. You can't mistake it for anything. Pretty much restricted to the New Forest and Windsor Forest. Windsor, I think it's slowly declining. In fact, the whole, Windsor is losing its big beech trees. You know, it's losing the big ones. You've got a lot of muntjac grazing, which is killing off the saplings. I can see big long-term problems for Caliprobola at Windsor. But it would appear it's not doing too bad in the New Forest, and that's down to you guys. Is it Mark? Is it Mark that was studying it? I think it might have been Mark. Well done. 42 sites for it. That's unbelievable. The one next to it is also quite special. That's called Brachypalpus lafriformis. That's also one you find in the New Forest. And yeah, I mean, we need to know more about what the larvae are doing. We know roughly where the larvae are developing, but how are they sharing out the habitat? You know, are they all doing slightly different things? They don't seem to be totally species specific in terms of trees. So maybe it's a particular form of fungus breakdown or bacterial breakdown that shapes the assemblages. But they are wonderful creatures, and these are all quite big hoverflies. And yeah, and then we have other things. We have oh, look at that, Brachypalpoides lenta or lentus. The crimson girdle, the crimson belted hoverfly. It's a stonker. That's quite common in the New Forest. And also, if you go to places like Biddonfield and some of the other ancient woods in Hampshire, and generally you see it flying. You see it flying through the undergrowth. You know instantly what it is from the deep red of the crimson abdomen band across the abdomen. It's a gorgeous creature, absolutely beautiful. And then I've got a really special one at the bottom there. That's the logjammer hoverfly, and this is a really special hoverfly because it specialises in these woody log jams. So I don't think it's recorded in Hampshire. I think it is known from Dorset. Now, I stand to be corrected. We found a few populations of it in Warwickshire where we never thought it would turn up. So I suspect it might be under-recorded, but it's often these little bits of streams and these little quiet bits of river away from the public, on private estates where the public doesn't get to, bits of river that aren't cleaned up by the Environment Agency too often. You can get these little log jams forming, and that's where it breeds. And oh yeah, it's a fantastic creature. It's quite big, size of a honeybee. The log jammer hoverfly, Chalcosurfus unotus. Yep. And then there are some hoverflies, saprophytic hoverflies, that are tree specific. There are some aspen specialists, and the one on the left is called Xylota tarda, and that can be found in aspen woods all over Britain. But the one to the right, that sort of chestnut coloured one, that's the aspen hoverfly that's restricted to the Scottish Highlands, only known from about 15 woods in the Scottish Highlands. And we don't know why it's restricted. Well, we think we've got an idea. We think that aspen invaded Britain in 2 waves after the last ice age, and that Scotland's aspen woods are slightly older and have a slightly different ecology to those in the south, because they seem to have a lot of things that we don't get in the south. But those are wonderful creatures. And then we've got a couple of Scots pine specialists. We've got the pine hoverfly Blerophalax on the left, and that really is rare. That's only known from a handful of sites in the Cairngorms, and the RSPB and other people, Cairngorms National Park, are actually breeding them up. They're actually breeding them up and creating artificial breeding sites in Scotland. The one on the right, which is called Calycera rufa, that's interesting because for many years we thought that was a Scottish Highlands speciality, and then it turned up in Shropshire, and it turned up in Hertfordshire, and it turned up in Derbyshire, and it turned up in Norfolk, and then I turned up in Wales, and it's actually a Scottish Highlands speciality that seems to have spread south as mature pine plantations have got old enough. It doesn't have to be Scots pine. It's often used in Corsican pine and other species of pine. But it would appear that as plantations have got maybe over 150 years old and the right forms of rot have established, it's moving south, which is incredible. So that's good. That might turn up in the New Forest. Okay, and I've got a little bit of a call out here for a really unusual saprophytic hoverfly, which you can see in the New Forest, and it's called Microdon analis. There are 2 species of Microdon in the New Forest. These are very unusual hoverflies because they don't visit flowers, and the larvae were classified as mollusks until about 100 years ago. So if you go into the bogs, you pick up Microdon myrmecae, and that's breeding in the ant nests out in the bogs. I've forgotten which ant it's using. It's one of the Formicas, I think, or maybe one that I can't remember. But so yeah, you get one in the bogs, but in the woody areas, in places like Denny Wood, if you get an ant nest forming in a bit of decaying wood, you get Microdon analis. So it's very much associated with ant nests in dead wood, things like Calasius platythorax. So yeah, Denny Wood's a good place for it. I think Paul's found it in various other sites. You also pick it up in the Caledonian pine woods. But using the same habitat, maybe a different species of ant, but again, ants in decaying wood. And that's John Stokes there. Do you know John? John Stokes from the Tree Council. I think he lives in Hampshire. But yeah, that's John Stokes there. For scale, he's a lot bigger than me. Yeah. Okay. Some of the other flies associated with deadwood, some of these wonderful crane flies, some of these, what do they call them? Plume horn crane flies or comb horn crane flies, the Ctenopteras, Flaviola and Pectinicornis, really big crane flies that look quite scary, but are completely harmless. Wood soldier flies, that big rubber fly there, you don't get that in the New Forest. That's one that you get in the Cairngorms. But it's very interesting because its larvae are predators of the larvae of the longhorn beetles in fallen Scots pines. So some of those great big I've forgotten I've forgotten the genus of longhorns. Oh, my brain's not working. This is my second talk today. That's probably why. But yeah, you get these great big longhorn beetle larvae in the Scots pines, and that's what these hornet robber flies are feeding on as a larva. And then as an adult, they hunt flying insects, weird sorts of snipe flies, weird sorts of stilt leg flies, and yeah, lots of flies. And when you know what the biology of these flies is, the ecology, it kind of opens up a whole world because it makes you look at the deadwood in a much more critical way. You know, in the same way as Inuits have different words for snow, entomologists have different concepts for deadwood, often shaped by the insects that are breeding in them. You know, as I say, is it nearly 1,000 flies? Yeah, 700 species of flies associated with deadwood, all shapes and sizes. They help you to understand the deadwood habitat better. So moving on to beetles. Beetles generally prefer drier wood to flies. So often, if you get a bit of an old tree in the open, or you get a fallen stump or a trunk, fallen trunk in the open, that tends to suit the beetles more than the flies do. Actually, the one that goes against that, believe it or not, is the stag beetle, because the stag beetle does like sort of quite wet, decaying roots underground. So it's slightly different to most beetles. But here we've got some examples of some of the saprophytic beetles. The stag beetles, of course, you get all three of them in the New Forest. Noble chafer, the green one in the middle there, and also the bee chafer. So the noble chafer actually uses a variety of trees, but it's particularly dependent on old orchard trees. It's not restricted to old orchard trees, but in places like Worcestershire and Herefordshire, that's the main habitat it's using to breed in, the dry powdery wood mould in old orchard trees. The bee chafer to the right, that tends to be used in things like birch stumps. That's very much a thing of the north and the west of Britain in birch woods. And then you get some wonderful click beetles, often associated with heart rot and such like. The longhorns are fantastic. Yeah, if you get one of Paul's books, one of Paul Brox's books, he covers these really well. And I suspect, I think at least one of those beetles, the Tanner beetle, which is that black one at the top, was photographed in his back garden. Thanks, Paul. Then cardinal beetles, giant weevils, false darkling beetles, jewel beetles, all doing slightly different things using slightly different bits of deadwood, but some really spectacular things. But of course, not all the deadwood beetles are large. There are some really interesting small ones. And in fact, Mike was showing me a wonderful picture of a tiny little wood boring beetle with feathery antennae, which he was getting very excited by, because some of these small ones, when you photograph them with a macro lens, they are absolutely exquisite. But yeah, the beetles are fantastic, and you get some of the bees. Some of the bees that use bee hotels will happily nest in deadwood. That was probably the natural nesting site for them before we created bee hotels. Things like the tree bumblebee, which has only been in Britain for about 25 years, that is quite dependent on. It does a lot of its nesting in rot holes of trees. It likes cavities in trees. Of course, it'll also use bird nest boxes. But the other thing about the tree bumblebees, in the winter, the queens like to hibernate rather than going underground like a lot of bees do and using an old rodent hole. They much prefer to use a cavity in dead wood. Yeah, and then you get hunting wasps. Sometimes you can find an old tree stump. You can be absolutely buzzing with hunting wasps of different species. It's always quite exciting to find a nice hunting wasp aggregation on an old tree stump. And it's not just a hunting wasp, because then you get all the cuckoos and the parasites, things like ruby-tailed wasps and various sorts of weird flies that are kleptoparasites of them. Then you get things like the horntail on the bottom there. That's a type of sawfly. Horntails are fascinating. We've only got one native one in Britain. I think it is native to the pine woods, but it's spread. That's Eurycirus gygas, black and yellow horntail. But the horntails, what they do is when they drill an egg into wood, they also inject a fungus with the egg, and the larva requires the fungus in order to digest the dead wood. Now, our horntail doesn't do too much damage, but some of its relatives in the genus Cyrex, for whatever reason, when they introduce the fungus into conifers, it can cause massive dieback. So for the forestry industry, some of the horntails, some of the wood wasps are really dangerous to wood production because they literally cause mass dieback of the conifers. But yeah, so you'll find the horntail in Hampshire quite widely, and you'll also see Britain's largest ichneumon wasp, Rissa persuasoria. Often you see the ichneumon more than you see the horntail, but that ichneumon is drilling its eggs. It can actually hear or smell where the larva of the horntail is, and it knows exactly where to drill its hole. But it drills about 2 or 3 inches into the dead wood, and is able to inject an egg into the larva of the horntail, which is absolutely amazing. And then, as I've already alluded to, you can get ants in dead wood, using, just making their nest in the decaying wood, and probably harvesting the fungi. Hornets like dead wood. Hornets love to nest in hollow trees, and yeah, it's all sorts of things that use dead wood in different ways. There you go. There's a tree stump there. That's at Wyton Wood. That's a particular tree stump that you could go there on a sunny day in the summer, and it'd be absolutely humming with insects, particularly digger wasps, hunting wasps, and then all the things that are associated with those, some of the flies that could be parasites, some of the ruby-tailed wasps. So, yeah. And then some of the other things, wood-bearing wasps. I haven't got my own picture of a goat moth, otherwise I'd put that in there, but the goat moth is one of the best examples of wood-boring moth. And of course, the thing about goat moth is it causes quite a lot of damage. So you get a lot of sappy wounds, and a lot of other insects come in on the back of those sappy wounds. You get some spiders associated with dead wood. There's one very rare one that I haven't got a picture of that is a specialist of hollow trunks of old trees. But you can even pick up cave spiders in hollow trees. And there's a particular pseudoscorpion that's associated with old trees, centipedes, woodlice. Fantastic. Okay, so the key point about saprozylic invertebrates, there's a lot of them in the UK, over 2,000 species. Some are very rare and endangered. Some are very specialized, and we're still learning about the biology of these things. There's a real diversity of larval lifestyles that include Xylophagus, that eat in the dead wood, Saprophagus, maybe eating something like carcasses or dead things within the dead wood. You've got general scavengers, you've got the fungivores that are eating the fungi. You've got predatory things, you've got parasitic things, you've got some of them have got adults that need flowers, you've got things that make nests, and you've even got aquatic deadwood things that are using the water-filled rock holes. So those invertebrates, they're crucial for the recycling of deadwood, and they're fantastic barometers for the age and the condition of a site. And it's worth saying, because many insects have complex life cycles, they often require much more than just where they're breeding, the deadwood they're breeding in, to complete a life cycle. So if you think of a hoverfly or a longhorn beetle, they breed in the deadwood. They might be there for 3 or 4 years, but then they must have the right blossoms, or if you're a predatory thing, the right prey, in order to fulfill a life cycle. So often you need the deadwood in association with other habitats. Okay, what's the heading of that one?
Insects make you think about habitats in a more sophisticated way.
That's right, Mike. You're quite right. They absolutely do. I was talking about this earlier. I was talking at the local nature partnership meeting earlier on today, saying exactly this. That when you got the sort of the head of an entomologist on, you just see things in a different way. And I really want to. This is something that I find quite exciting. The coleopterists, those are the beetle people, the beetle fanatics. They love recording deadwood saprozylic beetles, and when they've got a good list, they classify the species on that list into various classes according to their fidelity with veteran trees, and they end up with a score that's used to rank sites. It's called an index of ecological continuity, and it helps you to judge how. I was talking about that relay race with the battens. Well, let's put it like this: you can have 2 modern sites that look quite similar in terms of the old trees they've got. One might have lots of unusual saprozylic species, and one may not have so many, and that probably relates to the history of the site. So it might be that one site isn't as old as another site. So even though they've got similar trees today, one site might be 300 years old, the other site might be hundreds of years old in terms of continuous presence of old trees. Or it may be that the way that site has been managed, certain microhabitats have disappeared during history and they've lost their precious cargo of associated invertebrates and they've never come back again. Whereas another site may have had a really good continuity of all the microhabitats like the rot holes, the sap runs, the heart rot, and it's been uninterrupted for centuries. And so it shows in the insects. So the insects are absolutely brilliant at showing what sites have ecological continuity. And it doesn't just work with deadwood. You know, if I go to a peatland, if I go to something like a Valley Mire in the New Forest, I can see that those Valley Mires are very special and often much better than Valley Mires elsewhere in Britain because, you know, they're big, they're old, they've got, you know, a very, very long history. So yeah, you can use it. You can develop an index of, I mean, ancient woodland indicator plants are a form of ecological continuity measurement. So it's just a great way of looking at the stuff. But you can do stuff with insects you can't do with plants, particularly with deadwood. So I think that's really exciting. Okay, what's the heading on that?
None.
Heading? Oh, okay. Right. So what am I saying? I can't even see the top line of that.
Helps identify most important locations.
That's right. It does. Yeah. So yeah. So that's right. So it helps us to rank sites. So we now know that the top English sites for saprozylic insects include the New Forest, not surprising, Windsor Forest and Great Park, Bredon Hill, Langley Park. So yeah, this is a ranking. It might have changed now, but there is a website for it where we can now rank the most important sites for deadwood invertebrates, and a lot of those sites are important internationally. You know, they're even on a European level base, or a full European basis. They're important. It's important if we want to designate them and manage them properly. It's important that the land managers and Natural England know that these sites are really important. The top Welsh sites: Powys Castle, Chirk Castle, Dynevor Deer Park, and the top Scottish sites: Abernethy Forest and Blackwood of Rannoch. I'm going to the Blackwood of Rannoch this year. I've never been there before. Quite excited about that. So yeah, so that's the sort of thing you could do with invertebrates. Okay. So let's talk about the management options now. So you've got all sorts of options if you want to promote deadwood and deadwood invertebrates. One of them is non-intervention. Just let nature take its course. Let deadwood accumulate, let old trees just age naturally. And that's kind of what happens in the New Forest and various other places. You can't, obviously, once you get lots of people in these areas, you start to deal with hazards. And obviously people are worried about hazards. And it's one of the problems if you get old trees encapsulated within new development. It's not great news, you know. And the trouble is often you get new development. They say, "Oh yeah, we'll protect the old trees," and then the old trees become deemed as dangerous after a while. And then they start saying, "Oh, we've got to take that old tree down," and it kind of does a complete nonsense of the planning condition for that development. But yeah, that's one option. Just let things just age and mature, and just non-intervention. Other options are to actively promote deadwood, perhaps leaving log piles after coppicing, log piles from felled trees, perhaps preserving old trees and making sure they don't fall apart using splints and supports. And then something they're doing a lot at Windsor now, where things are getting quite critical, is they create fake hollow trunks and they attach them to the trunks of other trees and just hope that some of the rare insects will transfer over to the hollow trunks. I have no idea if it's working, but things are getting quite desperate at Windsor because they're losing the big old trees and they're not being replaced. Yeah. And I can't see what the top says here, but start with it is important. Is that the start?
Yeah, constant input of new deadwood.
That's right. So yeah, it's quite important. Yeah, it's very important to when you're managing trees with deadwood and deadwood insects, is to think about the long-term planning. You know, it's not good enough that a tree falls down. How can I put it? You want constant input of deadwood because often the deadwood is only suitable for certain insects in the first few years of its existence. So, for example, we've got a recently fallen aspen there. With James Silvey from RSPB. Some of you might know James. So it's a recently fallen aspen near Grandtown. Now, aspen is really good for about the first 5 years. Basically, the cambium layer below the bark decays over about a 3 or 4 year period when it's on the ground like that, and it's very, very exciting for insects in that period. Then it dries out and it loses those precious insects, things like Hammerschmidtia, the aspen hoverfly. And it's probably the same. Well, it is the same with oak and beech in places like the New Forest. When they fall down, these bits of deadwood have a particularly unique assemblage of insects for the first few years. Then that assemblage goes and another assemblage moves in. But really, you want a big site with lots of old trees where there's always a constant input of deadwood, and also input of deadwood from different tree species, because some species prefer the deadwood of some species, some trees to other trees. Also, you want deadwood in the shade, deadwood in the open. Basically, you want to make your sites as big as possible, so you get a constant input of deadwood, and that deadwood is as varied as possible. So there you go. There's the aspen hoverfly, and it can't use a fallen aspen in the first couple of years, but then from about year 3 to about year 6, it breeds in the fallen aspen, and then the aspen loses suitability. So that's the sort of thing you're dealing with. Okay. What does the top of that say, Mike?
Managing rides and clearings in woods.
That's right. Yeah. So basically, yeah. So because a lot of insects require flowers, or if you're a predatory insect coming out of deadwood, you might need prey. And also sometimes they like places to lek and to mate and to breed and courtship. It's quite valuable to manage a wood so it's not just dense. You know if you have a system of rides within a wood, it's quite good to do things like ride scalloping, just to create little flowery areas along the rides. It's also good to have sort of nice clearings and ride intersections that are quite flowery, but perhaps make sure there's some nice spring blossoming shrubs. But yeah, it can be quite valuable to diversify wood and make it nice and flowery and blossomy for the things that are coming out of dead wood. And spring blossoms are particularly important in this regard. There you go. There's some spring blossoms: goat willow, some blackthorn, some wild cherry, some hawthorn. Yeah, you know, a lot of your deadwood insects are very reliant on these spring blossoms. And places like the New Forest, there isn't enough spring blossom. You know, I often go to New Forest and think, oh, wouldn't it be great if I had a bit more goat willow or a bit more bramble or a bit more hawthorn? And of course, in the past, we probably did have, because there were a lot more enclosures protected from grazing in the past. But the New Forest, generally speaking, is a little bit overgrazed these days, and that's affected the density of flowering shrubs. But if you do find a flowering shrub in the New Forest, particularly April and May, you can get some very, very rare insects on it. So yeah, so I'm always banging on about blossom sequences. You know, I talk a lot to farmers, lots of local authorities. I'm always saying, create a strong blossom sequence. Try and have a variety of blossoming trees and shrubs, that rather than just creating the sort of 2 weeks you might get with hawthorn or 2 weeks you might get with blackthorn, if you have a mix of species, you could have 2 or 3 months of blossom in the spring, and that serves a good variety of insects. In summer, brambles, hogweed, thistles, ragworts, wild angelica, scabiouses, and by autumn, ivy. These are the sorts of things that can be really good for insects, deadwood insects in the summer. And particularly hogweed. Hogweed's really good for longhorn beetles and such like. And yeah, so don't overmow your flowery woodland rides. You know, try and promote the flowers there. Don't remove all your ivy. Just sort of boost up the variety of flowers you've got. Okay, yeah, I think I'll put this slide in here just to say that, you know, one of the problems we have with the New Forest is it's overgrazed, and you know, you're not getting a lot of flowers now on the ground layer, and often it's suppressing things like hawthorn coming through and such like, and bramble. But yeah, if you do get a good patch of bramble, it's absolutely dynamite. Whoops, there we go. So the key points, I can read this. Broadleaf ancient woodland should have lots of deadwood. They reckon 100 to 200 cubic meters of deadwood per hectare if possible. Deadwood should be as varied in nature and location as possible. Just remember that you've got a lot of insects and they're not all doing the same stuff, and they don't all need the same thing. They need diversity, variety. Deadwood should not be removed unless there's a considered justification. I mean, obviously, if it's timber, you have to remove it because it's commercial, but you know, some people are overzealous in removing deadwood. Veteran trees should be conserved, and site management should aim to maintain, if not increase, the long-term number of veteran trees, and ensure that, you know, those microhabitats with their precious cargo get passed from generation to generation without bottlenecking or periods of loss. At some sites, you may have to veteranize your trees. At one point, they were using dynamite. I don't know whether they still do it, but they were actually using explosives to try and veteranize trees and make them older before their time. They should try that on some humans, actually. But yeah, and some people even inject wood mold to try and get certain fungi inoculated into trees to speed things up. Tree species can matter, and so when you manage, when you plan the management of your woodland or your pasture woodland or whatever, you should be species aware. It's very easy when you're doing tree management to accidentally remove all your aspen in one go, or all your birch in one go, or all your alder in one go. And whenever you do management of trees, just be aware of what species of tree you're getting rid of. And don't get rid of all your goat willow in one go, because it's a really good blossom. Non-intervention can be really useful, but managed rides and clearings can be good as well. Sometimes deliberate relocation of dead wood and log piling can have a place to sort of make sure that the dead wood is in different places. You know, some in the damp and the shade, some in the open, because different insects use it in different places. Grazing can be damaging to some woods because it can remove the humidity and the sheltered field layer. But for other sites, it's part of the long-term ecology. You know, in some bits of New Forest have always been grazed, and I'm not saying get rid of grazing in the New Forest. We could just do with some enclosures where they stop it. And yeah, finally, invertebrate surveys. It's really important to know what's there and to identify valuable saproxylic assemblages. And so, you know, whenever you get a chance to commission or to carry out a survey, you should try and do it and use it to inform management decisions. Because really, you know, when you're looking at things through the eyes of an entomologist, it really does shape the way you think about what management is needed. How do you plan for future care of a site? What habitat creation do you do? Yeah, certainly as an entomologist, you have quite a detailed take on that subject. Okay, in terms of literature available, there's quite a lot of stuff out there. So yeah, there's the Ancient Tree Forum book at the bottom left-hand corner there by David Lonsdale. You've got Habitat Management for Invertebrates by my friend Peter Kirby. Then the Woodland Trust has just produced a series of booklets, which are really useful. There's my review of pollinators associated with dead trees and such like at the bottom there. Oh, another couple of my offerings from the Bug Life website. So I wrote quite a lot of guidance notes when I was at Bug Life. In fact, you can get, if you go onto my ResearchGate site, all of these, because it's actually quite hard to find these on the Bug Life website because they've got so much there. But if you go onto my ResearchGate site, which is quite easy to find, and you scroll down, I think it's chronological. If you scroll down about 10 years, you'll find a lot of these leaflets on deadwood woodland management. They're written very carefully, not to bamboozle people with technical terms. Okay. And if you want to have a go at recording insects, here's some of the wonderful literature. And there's 2 books by Paul Brock here. So Paul, you owe me lots of money because I'm advertising your books. You got the Paul's book on the Comprehensive Guide to Insects of Britain and Ireland. He's also written a book on the New Forest. If you haven't got it, you should have it. And there's 2 of my offerings in the middle. And then there's also, we've got the wonderful multi-volume Beetles of Britain and Ireland by Andrew Duff. There's things like Britain's Hoverflies, but there's no end of books. If you go onto NHBS website, you can see all the wonderful books that are available for identifying insects. There's also a lot of stuff on the internet and too much to really go through. But what I will say, a bit of self-promotion, is I do a lot of stuff on the internet. I've got a Flickr site, and I've turned it into a massive sort of visual encyclopedia or dictionary for the groups of insects I'm interested in, so particularly Diptera, bees, wasps, and such like. And it acts as a virtual museum collection and also as a virtual field experience, because believe it or not, some of these insects, unless you go to museums, they're very hard to identify. And even when you go to museums, often you're bamboozled by the sheer number of specimens, the fact that some of the specimens can be quite old and crusty and not very good specimens. And I've kind of tried to help by creating a virtual museum online. And of course, I have the advantage that I can choose the best specimens, you know, and I can go to different museums or borrow stuff from people, and I can make sure the very best specimens are photographed. I can really clearly photograph the features you need to be looking at. So I'm trying to help in that process of verification. And also, if you just want to see if you just want to celebrate insects, you can do it through my Flickr site. But there's a lot of great websites out there. Equine Birds. What's the Leicestershire one? Oh, it's called Nature. Oh. That's the one. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of really good websites out there. Oh, Nature Spot. There you go. Yeah, Nature Spot. Yeah, that's a great site. Equine Birds. There's a great site. Oh, yeah. There you go. So I think that's it. I hope you've enjoyed the talk. I hope it will get you to look more closely at what's on deadwood and old trees. And you're really in one of the best parts of Britain. And of course, you can submit your records. You can submit them to iNaturalist or iRecord. There's lots of apps now that will help you identify things as well. But it's really important that you help us to increase our knowledge of saprophytic species. And of course, when I look at the work that you've just done on the green forest hoverfly, you've almost preempted me here. What I'd love to see is work on other key species, things like the oak mining bee. That's got a big proportion of its British population in the New Forest. Things like Pacota personator, some of the really rare beetles. We could do with you guys helping us to understand, are they as rare as we think they are, and what exactly are they doing? We need to know more about their biology. There you go. That's it. I hope you've enjoyed that.
Steve, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
While people are sort of coming back, have you stopped sharing the screen? Could you stop sharing the screen?
Oh, yeah, stop sharing. There
Brilliant.
we go.
So we've got people back. So we see each other again now. So hello again. I'm going to kick off with a simple question. I see Russ from Wild New Forest has put 2 or 3 questions in the chat. So I'm going to...
That's good. I want to talk to him.
I'm going to ask Russ to unmute himself in a second and go through those questions with you. But I'm going to kick off with my traditional easy question, which goes to all guest speakers, which is, what can we do as ordinary members of the public who don't perhaps have management of a huge section of the New Forest to look after? What can we do as ordinary members of the public to help with this don't stop the rot?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing is you can use your gardens to create habitats. So you might be able to create a very simple series of saprophytic habitats in your garden by creating a log pile or leaving, if you chop down a tree, leave the trunk. If it's not dangerous, just leave the trunk and maybe drill some holes in it. I was once on Countryfile. with Matt. I forgot his second. Who's the Matt who's on the one show? Matt's, what I mean. Anyway, I was on the we spent a whole session just drilling holes in dead wood and telling people, get your drills out, use all those drill bits you've never used before for creating holes in dead wood, and see what colonizes them. But yeah, you can have a lot of fun with an old tree stump or some old logs. Just drill holes and let the bees and the wasps start colonizing the holes. Let the beetles start breaking down the dead wood. And then also you can put blossoms in. The blossoms you put in your garden may be serving saprophytic species in nearby woods, because a lot of these things can travel quite a big distance. So you can do stuff in your garden. If you're involved with a wildlife trust or another organization, you can start to help manage and shape some of your nearby nature reserves and make them more saprophytic friendly by log piles, encouraging old trees. Also, of course, if you know of any old trees in your area, is you can I don't know, you can just be vigilant and make sure that the local authority don't overmanage them or chop them down. Quite often you'll get a warning before a tree's removed, and you can sort of you can lobby. I mean, just things like your local council policies on trees. You can make sure that they include some policies for old trees, for veteran trees, because we're very keen that we promote veteran trees. And obviously, it's one of those natural conflicts between health and safety and an unusual habitat. But so you can do habitat creation, you can do lobbying, you can do recording. Those are some of the things you can do. A lot of it you don't have to be an expert to do. Does that help?
Yep, thanks very much. Russ, do you want to unmute yourself and go through your questions?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And
just to introduce, this is Russell Wynne from Wild New Forest.
Pleasure to meet you, Russ.
Hi, and thanks for giving me the chance to dial in this evening. And thanks for the talks. Give me a few nice new search images for next summer.
Great stuff. Yeah.
So one of the themes that we're thinking a lot about in the forest at the minute is, obviously, it's not just for inverts, but for birds, flora, fungi. There's increasing concerns that it's turning into a bit of an oasis in a wider countryside that's very degraded for biodiversity. So the risk is it becomes more and more of an oasis over time, and we want it to become more of an arc where it's actually seeding new areas that are regenerating or that are being developed. But the increasing urgency of changes to woodland age structure, composition, linked to climate, disease, grazing pressure, all these other things means that we're probably not going to have enough time to do that. So I've got sort of three related questions that you may or may not be able to provide some insight on. But the first one is there any evidence at this stage of genetic bottlenecking of saproxylic species where they're becoming increasingly isolated in the landscape?
No, there's not much evidence, and actually, it's quite funny because the butterfly people talk a lot about genetic bottlenecking, but they've done some recent studies on things like bumblebees and French wasps and such like, and they're actually finding there isn't genetic bottlenecking in some things. So sometimes it gets overstated. I think some of these things are designed to survive it because it's a type of habitat where you often do end up with very small populations, lots of small foundling populations. I'm not aware of that being a problem. I think habitat deterioration, habitat loss is a much bigger threat than genetic bottlenecking. But of course, it's not well studied. I mean, we are starting to do more and more genetic studying, but there are so many insects, it gets kind of tricky. But no, I'm not aware of that being a major issue. It might be, but there's no evidence for it.
Cool.
Yeah.
You already mentioned veteranization. I'm aware of studies looking at doing it for fungi, Limbodian, and others have done that. I'd be interested to know if the Windsor work has produced any results yet as to whether it works for saproxylic insects, whether it would be something we end up trying in some of the areas in and around the forest. We'll have to see. The third one was, has there been any, obviously for something like C. speciosa, you're looking at the New Forest and Windsor Great Park, and that's quite a big jump from one site to the other for that species. Given that vulnerability and the increasing sort of urgency of the situation, is there any thoughts on translocation of saproxylic inverts, and has there been any attempts to do that you're aware of?
There have been on the beetle side, yes. There's been quite a lot of work on the beetle side. There's been quite a lot of work on things like rusty click beetle, yeah, some of the beetles, and not so much on the fly side, I'm afraid. No, unless you go up to the cairngorms. In the cairngorms, there's been a lot of intensive work on the aspen hoverfly and the pine hoverfly. That's Blera and Hammerschmidtia. There's been a lot of them, particularly with Blera. They've actually created artificial breeding sites, but that's not really. There's some talk about perhaps having a go at it with hoverflies using things like artificial rot holes. Yeah, there's been a little bit of work on the beetle front. And what I would say is, I wouldn't say I'm the top person to talk to. People within the ancient tree form, but particularly Keith Alexander would be. So, do you know Keith Alexander at all?
No, but I'll follow that up. That'd be useful.
Yeah, so Keith is probably our top expert on saproxylic insects, and he will probably know everything that's going on. But to be honest, because I cover so much ground as an ecologist, I struggle to stay on top of all the latest activities, whereas Keith is much more specialising in saproxylic matters. But yeah, I can. I mean, if you've got my email address, I can. We can swap notes after this. But the thing I do want to tell you is, you may not be aware that I did a pretty big study of the New Forest Valley Mires, looking at the flies, and I've never written it up. It was about 10 or 15 years ago, but I've got some stonking data on all the flies of all the peaty wetlands of the New Forest, and we need to talk about that at some point. I just wanted to flag that. And you probably know Steve. Do you know Steve Trotter at all? Steve Trotter used to be the ecologist at the national park there. He's a good friend. We went to university together. But yeah, so I've been involved with the New Forest for quite a long time. You and me need to talk a bit after some other opportunity. But good to meet you.
All right, thanks. I'll let others butt in.
Okay.
So whilst you're on data and numbers, Paul just wanted to point out that the 32,000 number is wrong. And it is 25,000, as he correctly pointed out in his book.
Fantastic. In which case, I will update all my PowerPoints now. Yeah. I didn't quite believe it, but because it's JNCC, Joint Nature Conservation Committee, they're supposed to be the experts on everything. So if they can get it wrong, God help us. Thanks, Paul. Appreciated.
Okay. Andy Murdoch, do you want to unmute yourself? Come with your question.
Yeah, sure. And just to say, we'll hopefully be picking up on some of those issues that Russ mentioned in the surveys for Clipperbola next year. So yeah, hopefully if we'll get a few more people if anyone's interested. A quick plug for the team there. Yeah, my question was on artificial sap runs. Now, at the moment, you were saying how rich they are, and you know, it's somewhere that I've tried to go to find hoverflies. But is there scope, and is it safe to create artificial sap runs in trees for conservation purposes?
I think it has been done. I mean, it just means physically damaging them in some way, so that you basically get a weeping wound. Again, that's something the ancient tree forum will probably have technical knowledge of, and so yeah. So what I can do is I can direct you to the experts in that, which will be the ancient tree forum, and which is a massive. I don't know if you know the ancient tree forum. It's hundreds of people, like a loose affiliation, but it has all sorts of people from the arboricultural sector, the ecological sector, academia, and I can bet your life there'll be some people there that know how to do it. Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting. Thanks.
Yeah.
Zoe, did you want to come in about stag beetles? Where's Zoe?
Yes, I am here. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep. I can hear you, Zoe. I can't see you.
So my question is how I can get stag beetles in my garden. I've got a dead tree. Yeah. It's a willow tree and it died in 2018. But I've never actually seen a stag beetle in my garden, even though I see them around here all the time.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, they actually do like gardens. You know, in some parts of Britain, the primary habitat is garden trees that are unwell and have got decaying roots underground. So, but they are also very sensitive to soil type, because I know in Suffolk there's a real sharp cut-off point between in the distribution of breeding stag beetles according to the soil, and I can't remember whether it's the clay. I think they prefer the sand to the clay. Once you get onto the clay, they disappear. But yeah, it's really a case of they just like damp, dead wood under the ground. That's really what they're going for. So I mean, you could try burying. You could try getting bits of dead wood and burying it in your garden. That might help. Yeah. Why not bury? Why not create some deadwood graves and see if the stag beetles take that? But yeah, but it's all of this stuff can be quite unpredictable. You can't always, you know, sometimes their needs are so subtle you can't always work out why they're not there, why they are there. But all I can tell you is that stag beetles do quite like garden trees.
I don't know if you wanted to say any more about what the Green Forest Hoverfly group were thinking in terms of the replanting of birch trees. I know there's a bit of chat about where Forestry England are replanting. Sometimes they're planting next to a dead tree or dead stump and perhaps putting it on the wrong side so it gets shaded out.
Yeah, certainly from Clipperbola speciosa point of view, you know, it's a hoverfly. It likes sunning itself at the base of these dead beech stumps, and yeah, I think one of the surveyors noticed when we were out that basically the Forestry England had planted it in front of the tree, and so it was effectively shading it out. And you know, we're not convinced, or sorry, we don't have the sort of statistical evidence, but clearly, you know, the stumps where they're in full sun all day, we feel a lot more confident to find them than the ones that are being shaded out due to holly and other sort of vegetation. And so yeah, that was just one thing that from the work that we felt that there was at least a suggestion that you should be putting it on the northern side of the tree at the very least. But that was it really. I don't know if you've got any experience of that sort of management interventions.
Well, certainly, if you're interfering with the adult activity, that's not a good sign. And you're right; it's not the only one. There's quite a few of these saprophytic hoverflies that really love these little sun-dappled areas at the bases of trees. And if you eliminate those sun-dappled areas, they're not going to be able to do the courtship. You know, you're really interfering with the adult activity. So no, you're quite right, and I'm glad you're pointing it out and flagging it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, we've got a PTA. Oh, that's of course, yeah. I forget. Yeah, People's Trust for Endangered Species and information on how to build log piles for stag beetles. Thank you very much. Appreciated. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that because they did a massive project on stag beetle. I've got I'm getting too old. I forget all the stuff that's gone on. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff on from PTS on stag beetles and noble chafers and lots of other things.
Yeah, thanks very much. If you've not seen it in the chat, the link has just been popped into the chat about how to build a log beetle. Sorry, a log pile suitable for stag beetles.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. Appreciate that.
Well, one thing, if I may say something, you mentioned the hoverfly Calycera aurata.
Yes.
I've seen that in the centre of Southampton in the parks.
Yes.
I don't know if it's very much of an urban animal anywhere else, but we've had about three records in Southampton I've heard of.
Yeah, no, I've had it in urban areas, and also the ivy hoverfly, which is almost identical, that keeps turning up in urban areas. So yeah, it's not just the New Forest where you find these things.
Yeah, because we do have quite a few old trees around in the city, you know.
Yeah.
Really need to. There's so many other things to look at. That's the problem.
Yeah. Well, of course, what it does is it shows the importance of mature urban trees, because they can, they might only be 150 years old, but they can still have rot holes and useful features. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks, Phil.
Okay, I think unless anyone else wants to wave their hand, we've probably come to the end of the questions. One or two people putting in the chat that really useful talk. Thank you, Steve. That's been a brilliant talk, and I'm sure everyone will have found it useful.
Yeah.
As you will have noticed, it has been being recorded. It'll take me a day or two to get the recording into sort of ship shape and put the subtitles and all that sort of stuff onto it. But then it'll be made available on the YouTube channel, so you can come back to it and either watch the whole thing or pick through bits and pieces again. And Steve will be able to use it to brush up on his presentation skills. Not that he needs much brushing up. So give me a few days, and then I'll advertise when that's available on the YouTube channel for everyone to look at. And I'll also exchange email addresses between Steve and Wild New Forest and the Speciosa group as well, so that you can be in touch over the specifics. But apart from that, unless anyone's got anything further to say?
Yes, just from me, just a big thanks to you, Mike, and to Kath for organising it, and thanks to all of you that have come online. And I hope I meet you sometime, because I do want to get back down to your neck of the woods. Maybe sometime we'll meet up in the field looking for Caloprobolas or looking at other New Forest habitats.
That would be absolutely brilliant. And I must say that the first time that Jan and I met up was Steve and got this book off him. The signed copy of his book was at a Field Studies Council training session when he was teaching us about bees, and that got us into bees. And I can vouch for the fact that he's as entertaining in real life as he is on Zoom. So if we get a chance to meet up in the New Forest, it'll be absolutely brilliant.